Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Fox News contributor, with us now. And sir, welcome back to our program. Good to have you on. Big and important issues
Good morning,
here.
Joe. Great to be with you.
Let's talk about Japan and China first. Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said this going into this meeting. In a briefing yesterday, one of the issues that they're negotiating is whether or not we'll insert the word China. We're still discussing how and how much we describe China in the trilateral documents. What do you think of that negotiating tactic going in?
Well, Bill, it's pretty clear. We heard Mr. Kirby say, well, this isn't really about China. The truth of the matter is this meeting is all about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. And I think it's great that these leaders are getting together, that the South Koreans and Japanese and Americans are all working on this strategic threat. But it's less important. These process issues are far less important than the substance. If they just talk and nothing comes from this, the Chinese will view that as an accelerator of the risk to the United States and to the West. But if they come out with a substantive set of understandings, things that we're going to do together to build our economies, to push back against the various military threats, naval threats that are in the region, if they do those things well and they build this alliance and partnership out, this will be a very good thing for the American people.
Sir, in the lead up to this summit, the Chinese government as is to be expected, bloviating in a quite aggressive way. They don't like the fact the summit's happening, but this caught our eye. Take a look at this from the foreign minister today, urging Japan and South Korea not to get too close to the United States. He says, no matter how blonde you dye your hair, how sharp you shape your nose, you can never become a European or American. You can never become a Westerner. We must know where our roots lie. How do you, I can only imagine how that's being received at the White House. How is that being received by South Korea and Japan?
So I know this guy. This guy's a bad actor. Their foreign minister, Wang Yi, who made that statement. Look, those are ideas that are just antithetical to those of us in the West, whether it's in Europe or those of us who hold ideas of basic human dignity in Asia. Those are ideas that won't sit well in South Korea and Japan. It won't sit well with the Han Chinese people that live in Taiwan. It won't sit well with American citizens of Asian descent. No, these are about ideas, not about race and ethnicity in the way the Chinese want to put it. I think those are the kind of things that the Chinese government does when they are worried, when they're worried that that those of us who are pushing back against the Chinese Communist Party are beginning to develop partnerships around the world that threaten the very idea that Xi Jinping has, which is total global hegemony over the course of the next decades. And so it kind of makes me happy when I see Wang Yi go nuts like that and say silly things. Make no mistake about it. We have the right end of the stick. Peace and prosperity are what we've been pushing for. And if they get it right today, we'll be closer to that.
Big meeting there. Meanwhile, in President Biden's foreign policy, this is what we found, approval or disapproval. 55% in our polling disapprove of his foreign policy management as of now. Let's call for number 5, guys. Thanks. We are 5 days away from our big debate. And part of this foreign policy, Mr. Secretary, as you know, deals with the war in Ukraine. And to many, there has not been a national conversation as to what our commitment should be, whether it's $30 billion, $130 billion, $500 billion. Where is the future course of our involvement in this war? And these Republicans on stage, some of them are all in and some of them are not. There are nuances in their arguments. How do you think this is going to go? Because as I see it, this will be the first moment that we begin a national conversation about this war in Ukraine. How do you see it?
You know, Bill, that's a really good point. President Biden has never at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night gone to the Oval Office and told the American people what it is we're doing in Europe, in Ukraine, and why we're doing it, why it matters to the American people. I wish he'd have made that case. I think it's very important what we're doing there. I think pushing back against Vladimir Putin, having control of a European capital would be disastrous for the United States. But you're right. President Biden hasn't made that case. I think it's reflected in his polling numbers. We shouldn't forget, we're 2 years on now, 2 years and a couple days on from the disaster that killed 13 Americans in Afghanistan. It was President Biden who said a minor incursion in Ukraine might just be okay. We can see that American leadership is failing around the world, and I think the American people can see it. You see it in the polling numbers, and I hope when they take the debate stage next week that they'll connect these two ideas, right? You were talking earlier on the show about education. If you can't teach third graders to read, the Chinese Communist Party is going to walk all over us. The distinction between national security and American prosperity in our education systems are deeply tied, And I hope everyone on the stage on that will make the case for why their vision of how we execute our work here at home and abroad are connected, and why it matters that America actually leads in every one of those categories.
All right. Well, all eyes on a couple days from now. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time. Mike Pompeo.
Teal and Bill, thank you. Have a great weekend.
You the same, sir. It's gonna be